So I think there's a few visitors in here, but most of you know my kids. I am not my kids. I have no desire to be up here. Both of them seem to really want to be up here. I don't know where they get that from. They don't get it from their mother either. So they're just different, I guess. But I will have you guys turn to Matthew 7 for now. I have no formal Christian school education at any level. So I have taught some teen classes. This is my fourth or fifth time doing adults. I told preacher before the service, and I told a couple of the guys on Sunday, this makes me really nervous. And everyone's always like, well, you've done teens, you should be fine. And I always respond with, teens aren't real people. So it's a lot different being up here. But for the preacher boys, I know a lot of them aren't here, and for the ones that went downstairs too, it's okay to be nervous because I'm probably at least twice most of your ages, and I'm still nervous being up here, even though I do a lot of other things that would make other people very nervous. But so that being said, most people would share their pedigree, I guess, or so to speak, but I don't have that, so I guess I'll share a little bit of my testimony to kind of lead into it, and then I have a very short, it seemed much longer when I was putting it together, but I think honestly I could do it in about 5 minutes if I tried real hard. So I grew up in Morgantown, West Virginia. I was in a broken home. My parents got married when I was 7 and divorced when I was 9. So my mom was mentally ill and had some substance abuse issues as well. And so Dad wasn't around because of those things. She kept him away. And neither one of them were really big into church. I think summer of 3rd grade, I had a friend invite me. And then I started riding a bus shortly after that. Emmanuel Baptist Church in Morgantown. Dr. Elwell was my preacher growing up. Our bus captain always found us. I mean, just in 6th grade alone, I was at 3 different schools, which means we moved 3 or 4 times that year, and the bus captains would always find me. So that was very encouraging, and God protected me, I feel, growing up and keeping me in that. And I was saved at VBS. I believe it was the summer between 4th and 5th grade. I can take you to the room and the person and that. I do have the date in a Bible somewhere, but don't have the date memorized as many do. Just went to church through my early teen years, had the normal bus kid backslide in the junior, senior high transition there. Ended up getting married in that same church, though. Met Ashley, completely separate. I know there's a few visitors, but most people in here know my wife, Ashley. We were from different towns and just met through mutual friends. Ended up getting married in that church, and then the Lord moved us to a different church in West Virginia. We geographically moved as well. So then I got into my career that I'm in now, and the Lord moved us to Yuma. And when we were looking for churches, because the church that we went to in Bridgeport, there was a family there. They're in oil and gas, and we'd never moved more than 20 miles. I mean, I was from the big city, and she was from the small town, but Morgantown's not a big city either. So the furthest that either one of us had ever moved was 22 miles, give or take, because she moved to Morgantown when we got married, and then we moved to Grafton not long after that, back to her hometown. So, but he gave us, with all his moves, his most important piece of advice was find a church where you're going before you get there. And so we started looking, and just the way God works is unusual. There were 2 churches we were looking at. One of them was planted by Dr. Elwell, who was my pastor growing up. And then the other one is it's Dr. Getch's son, John Getch. And our church in West Virginia had just done, our young adult married Sunday school class had just done a lesson on a book that Dr. Getch had written. So it was kind of one of those things, as we were narrowing down churches, we were like, okay, between these two. And we ended up going to the smaller one that Dr. Elwell had planted, and that was where I started a teen class. And it was something that I had always wanted to do. I don't know why, but I'd always wanted to work with teens and never got the opportunity until I got to Yuma. The Lord ended up leading us away from that church and to Faith, where Brother Getch preaches, Pastor Getch preaches, and ended up working in the teen ministry there, but not as much. So I think I did 2 Wednesday night services at Freedom, and I think I did 1 Wednesday night service at Faith. So I think this is my 4th, so be gentle. But I was saved young. Like I said, I think about 4th grade. I did go to teen camp, or what is it, youth conference at Hammond 1 year. I think it was the first year that I could go, so between 8th and 9th grade, I think. That's kind of, in a nutshell, just a lot of protection on my life with the way I grew up and how my house was. And so here I am. But, public speaking, not my thing. I do occasionally do it for work as well, but here we are. Matthew 7, verse 7, first part of verse 7, first part of verse 8, and then we'll pray, and I'll try not to rush through this too much. 7:7, ask, and it shall be given you. And then moving on to 8, for everyone that asketh receiveth. Let's pray. Dear Lord, thank you for this day, Lord. Thank you for this opportunity to speak tonight. I just pray, Lord, that you would speak through me. Help me to say the words that need said so that you can touch people's hearts, Lord, because it's certainly not going to come from me. I just pray that you would help me to keep my nerves up here and to stick to the lesson, and just pray that it would be a blessing to somebody, Lord. I pray and ask this in Christ's name. Amen. So, Pastor's been going through this. I guess backing up, when Pastor asked me to do this, the first thing my wife asked me was, well, what are you going to teach? And I was like, well, I don't know. I do have a couple lessons that I've done before, and I have a whole bunch of them that I've done for teens that don't always directly translate. She's like, well, you should do this one. Not the one that I'm doing tonight, but a different one. And I was like, okay. And so I started reading the notes, and I was just like, that's not it. So I reviewed a couple others and then just kept doing my daily reading. And so when Pastor touched on this in the past couple weeks, I had no idea that I was going to do anything like this. So, but here we are. So here it's telling us, ask and it shall be given you. For everyone that asketh, receiveth. Over in James 4, though, James chapter 4, verse 2 and 3, I have it in my notes, but I am human, so I'm going to turn there and read it from the Bible instead of from my notes. So, just reading verse 2 more for context than anything. You lust and have not, ye kill and desire to have and cannot obtain. Ye fight and war, yet ye have not, because ye ask not. Ye ask and receive not. So, between these two passages, it kind of seems like there's a little bit of a contradiction. Ask and you shall receive. But then in James it says, ye ask and receive not. We know the Bible doesn't contradict itself, though, so there's more to it. So what is the issue? How do we work through these verses, reconcile them? It's simple. Like I said, I'm used to teaching teens. Most of you have already probably finished reading the verse, but if you finish reading, ye ask and receive not, because ye ask amiss, that you may consume it upon your lusts. So the Bible answers it right there, so there's no contradiction. in Matthew, there's obviously contextual verses around that would explain how ye ask and it shall be given to you. And here we find that it's because we're asking amiss, or we're not asking for the right things or with the right heart. So sorry, I lost my place. Why do we ask amiss? Matthew 6:21. And just as a warning, I'm not a title person. I'm not an alliteration person. I'm not a 3-point person. So I hope if you're a note-taking person, maybe you can figure something out, or I can give you my notes afterwards. Because, but Matthew 6:21. For where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. And then another seemingly contradictory issue with the heart, Jeremiah 17:9. It tells us there, and again, bear with me while I get there because I don't want to read notes if I've written something down incorrectly. The heart is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. Who can know it? Yet in Psalms 37, the second part of the verse, and he shall give thee the desires of thine heart. So again, another seemingly contradictory thing, and you guys are adults, so you're probably going to figure it out real quick, but I've taken verse 4 out of context, not read the first half of the verse. But we have this wicked heart, yet the Bible tells us that we can get the desires of our heart. So how do you work through that? How do you reconcile that? And the beginning of the answer is in the first part of verse 4 there, where it says, delight thyself also in the Lord. And he shall give thee the desires of thine heart. So how can we overcome our desperately wicked hearts? We see here we can delight in the Lord, but the direct answer is we cannot. It all boils down to God. Here it says, delight thyself in the Lord. We'll look at a couple other verses. Psalm 51:10. Psalm 51:10 says, create in me a clean heart, O God, and renew a right spirit within me. So here, obviously, we're asking God to make our heart right and to renew our spirits and put us on the right track. Proverbs 3:5 and 6. I know a lot of us have this memorized. I do, but again, nerves, I will turn there and read it before I bumble through it. I actually learned it as a song as a bus kid, but I will not torture you with that either. So Proverbs chapter 3, verse 5, trust in the Lord with all thine heart, and lean not unto thine own understanding. In all thy ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct thy paths. So again, going back to God, it's not anything that we can do. Our heart is desperately wicked, so we need to get it right, obviously, to be able to have the desires of our heart granted. Going back to Matthew 6, Matthew 6 and verses 20 and 21. But lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust doth corrupt, and where thieves do not break through nor steal. For where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. And we read verse 21 earlier, but here it's telling us how we can lay up the right treasures and put our heart on the right track. Finally, going back to, I'm going entirely too fast. But going back to James chapter 4, and I'll read 2 through 4, and then I think jump down to 8. You lust and have not, you kill and desire to have and cannot obtain, you fight and war, yet ye have not, because ye ask not. Ye ask and receive not, because ye ask amiss, that ye may consume it upon your lusts. Ye adulterers and adulteresses, know ye not that the friendship of the world is enmity with God? Whosoever therefore will be a friend of the world is the enemy of God. And then jumping down to verse 8, draw nigh to God, and he will draw nigh to you. Cleanse your hands, ye sinners, and purify your hearts, ye double-minded. So we know now we ask amiss because of our desperately wicked heart. If we're asking of our own selves, even us as Christians, we can ask the wrong way or for the wrong thing or even for the wrong outcome. Pastor talks often about his way of praying, which I've heard of before, where he just asks God to take the action, but doesn't hamstring God, so to speak, with the desired outcome. So sometimes we like to pray and ask God to do something a certain way or for a certain outcome, whereas I prefer not to tell God what to do or attempt to tell God what to do, and I just pray and ask, as Pastor does, that God would just act in the matter and that it would be beneficial to God and the cause of Christ, however the outcome came out. So we ask amiss because of our desperately wicked heart, and we need God to overcome our desperately wicked heart. We can't do it on our own, mostly because in ourselves we wouldn't want to. We get comfortable in our flesh, and it's easy to do. Life gets busy. We do different things, and we have things that we want to do, especially in Alaska this time of year. For our 6 weeks that we don't have snow and can do things, and sometimes our motivations can be wrong, and that's a whole other lesson, and it's one that I've done before where things aren't inherently wrong, but when they get in the way of God, they can then become wrong, but an entirely different message. So with those 2 points, that leaves us with the last question or questions. How do we get our heart's desire? How do we get what we ask, or what we ask for? And basically the answer is we've already, read a lot of the verses, but it's simple. We get our heart's desire by turning our hearts over to God. In doing that, we get God's heart. And then our desire at that point is really his desire. So it really becomes simple. He's granting his own desire when he's granting the desire of our heart because we've grown closer to him and we're on the same track, so to speak. Definitely not at the same level, but same wavelength, and the message is the same. And so not that it would be hard for him to grant any of our desires, but it's much more in line for him to grant the desire because it's what he wants, because we're following him. And again, I've flown through this. But James says that we ask amiss so that we consume it upon our lusts. But when we transition from earthly lusts to heavenly treasures, we no longer ask amiss. And unfortunately, that's it. Usually I have 5 pages of notes, but I was nervous and thought this would take a lot longer than it did. So I guess you're up, Brother Joe.